The Hogsty presents It's Just Business with Steve Thomas and Rich Rogers. And now, here's your host, Chris Larry.
Hello and welcome to another episode of It's Just Business on the Hogsty Network, the podcast where we look at the sports industrial complex and the business and the dollars and cents of the sports that we love and are cynical about. We've got a little bit of a special year-end show where the three of us, my co-host Steve and Rich, are going to share our three top sports business stories of 2017, and kind of a look back, and it will also be a bit of a look forward because we're pretty sure that some of the things we're talking about don't end or didn't end on December 31st, 2017. So let's jump right into it. Rich, I'm going to start with you. Give us your number three. And we're going to count up in importance. So 3, 2, 1. Go ahead, Rich.
All right. Happy New Year, guys. It's 2018. Blessed to see another year. So my number three, this is great, actually. My number three is the Supreme Court has decided to hear New Jersey's case for allowing sports betting to have their own sports betting in the state of New Jersey. And I think this is intriguing because there is quite the discussion that New Jersey could actually win its case in that the Supreme Court, New Jersey is arguing that the NFL has no business and other entities have no business with interjecting themselves in states' rights to govern themselves with sports betting. And from what I understand, it's a very antiquated law, and this could potentially open the floodgates for other states to have sports betting. And again, from what I'm understanding, that they actually have a good chance of winning their case.
What side of this are you on, though, Rich?
I'm actually on the pro New Jersey, and I've never thought I'd say this, but I'm pro states' rights on this one, in that Jersey gets. Now that's
music
on
to
this
my
issue.
ears. Music to my political ears, Rich.
That's on this issue. On this issue.
You haven't come over to the dark side just yet, I guess.
No, not yet. No, we're not gonna fight the Civil War against you on this. But no, I think that I think it's intriguing, and I think this has some ramifications for other states. Jersey will never be Vegas. I mean, it's not the same experience, but it's definitely something to keep an eye on.
Well, interestingly enough, I love this story because it's embroiled in constitutional law issues, and I'm not convinced that New Jersey is going to win this simply because of the federal government's Commerce Clause powers are so broad, But to me, the real issue with this is, if you want to argue for the states. Is it really fair for the federal government to tell one state it can't do something, and tell 46 states it can't do something, and 3 or 4 that it can't? That would be the argument.
No, that doesn't sound fair at all.
If it were me, but the ramifications are enormous because you're talking about billions of dollars, in sports betting, billions of dollars in income for states. It's all taxable. It's a really big story, and we will see a response in the coming months.
Yep, looking forward to it.
So I'm pro states' rights in some issues as well, especially when it comes to the legalization of iniquity. So I am pro that, but I am also pro being able to sports bet in New Jersey because I would look forward to a time then me and a couple buddies can go kill a Saturday night and then an all-day Sunday sitting in a room laying bets on football. So
and kill your pocketbook while you're at it.
You know that. You budget for that, right? I don't think I'm making it a career choice, but it would be a fun way to kill one Sunday a year. So that's why I'm pro.
It would. I understand that. Betting personally isn't my thing, but I get it, and I certainly know why the state of New Jersey would want to do it. I'm just not convinced that they can make the argument. I mean, really and truly, what they have going for them is the change in the is a change in the composition of the Supreme Court with the addition of Justice Gorsuch, because he's so conservative, and these conservative judges tend to side on the sides of pro-states rights and things like this, and they love limiting the power of the federal government under the Commerce Clause. And so I think their chances are better with Neil Gorsuch on the court than without Neil Gorsuch on the court.
Well, we shall see. That's one we'll be tracking as we head deeper into 2018. Nice number 3. Steve, what is your third story?
My third story is, I never thought I'd say this, but my third story is LeVar Ball's effect on the shoe industry. And the reason why I say this is, love him or hate him, what he's done is he's really turned the basketball sponsorship thing on its head. Because, before Lonzo Ball and his dad showed up on the scene, all these basketball players, when they get drafted, they'd sign their deals with either Nike, Adidas, or Reebok. And if they were far enough down the list, they'd go to some Chinese company. But either way, they'd sign a deal. Well, LeVar, being the entrepreneur that he is, has formed this big baller company and has put a whole lot of his own money. I don't know where he got his own money, but he got it from somewhere. And he's put a whole lot of his own money into a company and made Lonzo Ball the star of it. And it's going to either succeed or fail on its own merits. But he's the first one I can ever think of that has totally ignored the free Nike money in favor of trying to build something much bigger on his own. And for that, love him or hate him, but for that, I applaud him.
So, funny. One thing, I'll do a little side note before I go into my number 3, which is that doing this podcast over the better part of the last year, which was a highlight of my 2017, so thank you, is how strange bedfellows Steve and I are, in that we theoretically don't agree on much and then end up being fairly consistent in agreement on strange things on a regular basis. Thus, my number 3 is also LeVar Ball in what I'm calling LeVar's world. And so I'm not going to repeat what Steve said because I agree with a lot of that take. My take on why LeVar is my third story is that we really do live in this era of the disruptor. Whether from the president to Silicon Valley, disruption seems to be the zeitgeist of our current era, especially when it comes to...
There's that word again. You use zeitgeist.
Big words. I love
show.
Zeitgeist. And he is tearing down conventions, whether it's way college athletics works, the shoe marketing and the shoe deals that Steve was talking about, building a personal brand. I have not seen anyone in a short amount of time have this much influence and be able to tear down decades-old conventions at big, large scales the way I've seen LeVar do it, at least in sports. And that seems to be kind of the men of the era. So for that, I think whether it's planned or accidental or weird combination of both, his disruptor status in the world's now merchandising, marketing, college athletics, and pro athletics has had a huge impact in a very short amount of time, and that just can't be ignored.
And I think, to that point, I 100% agree. The only thing that I would say is to what impact will it have on his sons? Obviously, one of his sons is NBA worthy and is actually in the NBA. But he actually opted to pull his students. I'm in work mode. He actually opted to pull his kids his son out of UCLA after that whole incident, and got his 2 sons to play overseas, which is unprecedented. And I just wonder, 5 years down the line, I mean, we're looking at how LeVar Ball is revolutionizing marketing. But what does he really? How will his children? How will his sons be affected? So that's what I'm more concerned about. I mean, I'm more of a moralist. I think, there isn't a price on a good education, particularly for 2 sons that may or probably will not be in the NBA. So we'll see.
Well, I mean, you bring up an interesting point, because not only did he, first of all, he didn't just drag one son out of UCLA, he pulled his younger son out of high school and sent him to Lithuania. That's a bold move, and that's a move I completely and totally disagree with. And look, LeVar Ball is an annoying guy, There's no way I would want my kid to be on his team because I couldn't stand him and I'd have to, I'd be indicted for murder, after a couple games. He's an immensely annoying guy and I don't like him. I admire what he's done from a marketing standpoint. But to your point, Rich, I mean, I can't help but think that he's really hurt his kids. Mm-hmm. Yeah, the two younger ones. I'm talking. Lonzo was fine. He's he's in the NBA. He's doing fine. Yeah. But LaMelo and LiAngelo, I just can't imagine. You're a parent. I can't imagine sending my 15-year-old kid to Lithuania to play basketball.
Yeah.
That's just it's just mind-boggling to me that he thinks that's a good idea when we have the high school system. The younger kid is a darn good prospect. In case you guys out there don't realize this, he's a legitimate prospect. Unlike the middle one, who's kind of so. I think we're the younger one is the younger one LaMelo. I always get them confused.
Yeah, because LiAngelo, because they call him LiAngelo. Yeah, LiAngelo's the middle.
Okay, all right. So LaMelo, I think, would be better served by remaining in the high school and AAU system, going to UCLA, and maximizing his potential rather than some random Lithuanian team where the coach doesn't even speak English.
And
yeah.
Let me be clear. When I say disruptor, that's not necessarily a compliment, right? The sort of Silicon Valley version of that has made this some kind of golden value. But disruptors, have lots of casualties. And I agree. His sons or some subset of his sons are probably part of that.
But, and a bigger issue is, has he redefined the definition of an overreaching parent? I mean, Eli Apple's mom is in the news for her, allegations that she is sort of governing and running
his mom from hell.
A stage mom from hell. You've got Richard Williams, Serena and Venus's dad, and then I also think another guy. I mean, this is, it's kind of in the same vein, but I think a guy that gets a pass is Archie Manning, and I always thought Eli Manning was a punk for his dad, saying, look, if the Chargers draft him, he's not playing there. So all of this to say, I think that LeVar Ball is just one of many overreaching parents that could end up really being to the detriment of his own kids.
Yeah, I mean, I think LeVar Ball has amped the stage dad thing up to about has turned the stage dad thing up to 11. If it's a scale of 1 to 10, he's on 11. Archie was at about an 8. Because, his kids were legitimate pro prospects. In the case of Peyton, a surefire Hall of Famer. Richard Williams, for whatever bad he did, his daughters are both,
Grand Slam
I can't and I can't remember which one is better, if it's Serena or Venus. Serena. Okay, Serena is, you can make an argument that Serena is the most successful athlete of the latter half of this era in any sport. You could at least make the argument. So it worked out for them, but I mean the idea that LaMelo Ball is going to go from a Lithuanian B League team, which is what the team they're on, to the Lakers, sounds a little nuts.
Yeah.
Well, we shall see. That's the beauty of it. There'll be more to come. So let's run.
And on behalf of, before you move on though, I'd like to say on behalf of It's Just Business, thank God for LeVar Ball, because we've gotten more. And I know Rich hates him, and he has to tolerate this nonsense. But thank you, LeVar, wherever you are, because you've given us hours upon hours of good chat, good sports chat.
He's a content spawning ground, that is for sure. All right, let's move into round 2. We'll follow the same order. Rich, give us your second story.
Okay, so I'm going to the NFL as a whole, it's been such a tumultuous year for the NFL. I mean, I think at the beginning of 2017, I think the whole Brady Deflategate was kind of coming to an end. And then you have the whole Colin Kaepernick issue has exploded in the NFL. Roger Goodell still and his cronies still have not... the NFL and the Rules Committee still have not been able to decide to determine what's a catch and what's not a catch. It's just been a tumultuous year, and then with the stadium protest. But I think the one thing that really kind of grabbed me this year, and it really still sticks with me, and I think that this is something that is completely glossed over, is that the President of the United States had interjected himself into a sports entity in calling a group of athletes sons of bitches. And I think that has really stuck in my craw. I think that's something that has not been addressed enough. And I just think that it is that the political landscape of this country has interjected itself into America's most popular game. Now, one could argue that Colin Kaepernick has something to do with that as well. But I just think the NFL as a whole, and not even necessarily from the business aspect of it, from the entity in itself, I believe was broken in 2017 for many people. Now, I wasn't going to. A lot of my Facebook friends say they were going to boycott, and as black people, we need to get together and we need to stand up for something. I wasn't going that route for a whole list of other reasons that I don't want to get into on this show. But I just felt that moment was something that I had never witnessed in my 47 years.
I mean, you and I, Rich, disagree somewhat on this issue. We've talked about it, offline. I do agree with you that I think the President of the United States has better things to do than worry about the NFL. There's a whole list of, domestic, international things that are far more important to the national security and the health and welfare of the United States and what the NFL is doing. And to that respect,
who has the bigger button? You mean who has the bigger button on his desk? I'm sorry. You might not have heard that. I don't know if you heard. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
I hadn't heard that. No,
Chris
I hadn't heard that.
What I'm talking about.
I haven't heard that, but
Okay.
but I do agree from that respect. In terms of President Trump calling these players names, I mean that's kind of what he does. It didn't bother me. I think the players need to get over it, and it wasn't that big a deal. That was just my opinion of it. But there's no doubt from a sports business perspective, there's no doubt that was the moment that galvanized both sides of this issue and really caused it to go into the stratosphere when it could have maybe been quietly buried in one way or another. But once President Trump spoke up, that sent the whole thing into a tizzy. And so I agree with you in that moment is one of the biggest sports business stories of the year because of the effect his words had on the business of the NFL.
I'm going to hold my tongue because I'm going to save some of my take on this for later in the list. So, Steve, why don't we move on to your round 2 selection?
Okay. My round 2 selection here is the Major League Baseball scandal involving the Atlanta Braves. Because I don't think we talked about it. We did a segment on this show about it, but it kind of faded away into obscurity a little bit. But it was actually, I think, a pretty big deal because for those of you who don't remember this was, a month or two ago. The Atlanta Braves executives got in trouble for rigging the international bonus structure to allow them to pay certain players a whole lot more money than they were allowed to pay. And the net result of that is that Major League Baseball actually voided 12 prospects' contracts and made them free agents, and then banned an Atlanta Braves executive from baseball, like Pete Rose style. Mm-hmm. Which is amazing to me because you've got Pete Rose and then you've got the Braves exec, which is incredible to me. But the thing to me is, I don't think this is the first time, nor is it going to be the last time that teams have tried to manipulate salary caps and spending limits. The Braves just happen to get caught at this. So what makes me wonder and what makes me think this is one of the bigger stories of the year is, are we going to see this very same thing go on with other teams? And is this going to erupt into a whole much bigger deal than just one guy on the Atlanta Braves?
I love that you highlighted this story, and I enjoyed talking about it. I think it was around Thanksgiving on our show, if I remember correctly. Because I really think it's another one of these stories that may seem like kind of, especially if you're not in Atlanta, if you're not necessarily a baseball fan, if you're not sort of following kind of hot stove baseball off-season stuff, that you might miss. But it seems like one of those, I agree, domino-type stories. Like, where does it end? Because everyone's doing funny stuff. We've never seen this kind of penalty in any sports league for what a lot of GMs and front offices of all major sports probably think is just a good amount of healthy gamemanship. And so to see a penalty leveled like this, which is going to have the Braves and other teams hackles up, and people will start looking for it, and will be a competitive advantage to get executives banned for life and reporting on each other. I think this is one where they'll be looking at the state of baseball and maybe pro sports in general 3 or 4 years from now, and look at this story as a bit of a kind of ground zero for what might start happening. It's very interesting.
Well, yeah. I mean, not only that, but the Braves lost 12 prospects. 12 big-time some of them were big-time prospects, and that's going to have a tremendous effect on the Braves farm system. And I'm not up enough on the Atlanta Braves farm system to know how good it was in the first place, but I can't remember another time where Major League Baseball, or for that matter, any American sports league, just flat out invalidated a contract based on the misdeeds of executives negotiating the contracts. That's the first that I can recall.
Well, they say if you ain't cheating, you ain't trying. But you're right. I think that this is probably a situation where they got caught. So yeah, that's just something that's actually something to bear watching. Very interesting.
Yep.
It'd be really fun if you were really nerdy to track those prospects and track them over the next 3 to 5 years and see what talent the Braves actually lost on the field.
I'll tell you what. I mean, it may not be one of us doing it, but I can guarantee you some people are going to be doing that. And I know a lot of those prospects have already signed with other teams, and they've moved on. And of course, interestingly enough, for those of you who don't recall this, baseball was kind enough not to punish the prospects. They did let them keep the money because this stuff comes with guaranteed money. In case, how it works for these guys, because these prospects aren't going straight to the Atlanta Braves. They're going, these are, first of all, kids from Central America who are like 18. Yeah. They're going, a lot of times they'll start off in a Central American league sponsored by, one or more Major League Baseball teams. It'll be like the Venezuelan Summer League, Winter League, something like that. And then they'll move on to the minor league structure and start in low A ball and et cetera, et cetera. And so the guaranteed money up front is what gets these kids through, and because these people are poor. When you're talking about Central American, it's poor in a way that we as Americans, and I can guarantee you, we as Americans listening to this show just can't understand. A lack of money and prospects in a lifestyle that most Americans will not know and can't possibly know. And so it's changed their lives, but this guaranteed money sets their family up and gets them through to the point when they have a Major League Baseball contract. And so they're actually going to it's kind of double dipping. They're going to get paid twice because there's going to be more guaranteed money coming their way when they sign their new contract with their new team. So it's kind of a windfall for the players. I just can't believe that Pete Rose and this Atlanta Braves exec are in the same boat.
Yeah.
It seems incredible to me,
With Pete Rose, maybe a better chance of getting back.
Yeah, well, I think Rob Manfred's about done with Pete Rose, so I don't think he's getting back anytime soon. He probably should, but
they'll probably let him back in. They'll probably let him back in when he's like on his deathbed or something like that.
Yeah, but that's what I'm thinking, because I think personally, we're straying from a topic here, but I'm about to go on a short rant. The Major League Baseball Hall of Fame is a complete waste of perfectly good building, in my opinion, because the idea that you have a Hall of Fame in which the all-time hits leader, who's Pete Rose, is not in, your home run king, which is Barry Bonds, is not in, and Roger Clemens, who is arguably the greatest pitcher ever to play. Those guys are not in the Hall of Fame. That's not a Hall of Fame to me. It's a waste of space. So
that'll be a good one. We should put a pin in that one, maybe around the time of the induction ceremony or some other hot time in the baseball calendar to talk about that one. That'd be a good one for a future episode.
Yeah.
My number 2 is a little bit late in the year and probably has as much impact in 2018 or going forward, but I think it's actually a huge story. I'll preface it by saying it's mostly a entertainment industry story, at least at face value, but I believe that sports is entertainment and is part of the entertainment industry writ large, and I think the corporate ownership of the various pipes of that would agree. And so the mergers, or potential mergers still, of AT&T and Time Warner and of 21st Century Fox and Disney, and why they're looking to make these mergers is just a ginormous story in entertainment and thus sports. One, it means that the era of broadcast television, even as defined by cable, is on a very short leash, because one of the main things driving these mergers is so that they have diversified, broad, long tail content in which to create their own direct Netflix, Amazon style delivery mechanisms. So they're going and they're collecting brands, content, shows, libraries, broadcast rights, etc. And once that ground gets eaten up by these mergers like AT&T and Time Warner, Fox and Disney, the powerhouse that is Netflix, Amazon still in the game, they are all arming themselves for the content wars of the next 5 to 10 years. And sports is a really unique piece of that. One, because it's still a live medium, which is rarer and rarer. If you have sports content, you're immediately diverse in the kind of content that you have. And it's still huge, huge money. And so it's a big chip. And so if you look at something at what the impacts this has for Fox Sports Network and ESPN, what kind of HBO Sports with Time Warner, there's all kinds of machinations around why sports and sports content is driving this media consolidation as much as the more traditional entertainment content that they're also consolidating. And, in 5 years from now, when we're all have Netflix subscriptions and their long tail, and Disney subscriptions and their long tail, and what other media companies are created within that, I think we're going to look back at 2017 as really the beginning of that, and it's going to really have some revolutionize how we actually watch and pay for the sports that we enjoy.
You bring up a lot of good points, and it's a really big issue. I think, number one, it was interesting to me that part of the Disney Fox sale, a very big piece of that were the regional sports networks. That Disney's buying, because Disney, if people don't realize this, ESPN is the biggest profit driver in the Disney Corporation. It's a really big part of Disney. Clay Travis is a guy who's a very controversial guy. A lot of people don't like him. I understand why. He's abrasive, et cetera, et cetera. He brought up a good point about ESPN that I think is relative to this. And I hadn't really thought about it in this context before. Live sport, ESPN and Fox Sports are not networks that own their own content. The only content, with the exception of SportsCenter, and that's driven by highlights. But the primary ratings drivers on ESPN are the live sports, and they have paid a fortune. I'm talking billions of dollars for broadcast rights, but they don't own their content and they don't create their content, and so they're very reliant on these broadcast rights deals. Whereas in Netflix and Disney, the other parts of Disney do own their own content and they create their own content, and so it's a completely different calculus in terms of marketing and presentation to the public, which I thought was a very good point. But to your point, I think streaming has become, this year in particular, a much, much bigger part of sports and how people watch sports and how it has affected the marketplace. So it's definitely a story that's not going away anytime soon.
So let me just ask a clarify. So ESPN doesn't own their own shows like Pardon the Interruption, stuff like that?
Well, they do own that. That's their own content, yes. Yeah. But the big ratings drivers, if you look at what gets, like Pardon the Interruption gets no ratings whatsoever. Right. Less so. You can, like Roseanne, like a 20-year-old rerun of Roseanne will beat a lot of these talking head shows. Yeah. The ratings come from Monday Night Football, Sunday Night Football is, basketball, baseball, etc.
Yeah. it's funny because a lot of people criticize. One of the big critiques of ESPN over the last couple of years was how aggressive and how much money they spent on those broadcast rights. But that actually going forward in these deals actually looks like a really smart long-term play for the reasons that you just laid out. And so, if you can imagine, you're now paying for the Disney version of Netflix, which comes with the ability to access those live sports plus that long tail of content, and that's a pretty killer combination in what will be the new media entertainment wars. So they've taken a lot of critique, some justified, most justified probably, but actually having those rights, especially in that larger conglomeration, is going to be a real win for them. And ESPN does have, probably more so than Fox, does have some of that content. I mean, the 30 for 30s and those kind of things. And in a world where the Netflix model, where you don't need big eyeballs on everything, right? Some of it is having that long tail content and serving niche markets. And ESPN is some of that, which is some very minimal value. But they have created some of that, which you could imagine being better packaged. But it's really those live broadcast rights coupled with Marvel, Star Wars, Disney content. I mean, that's a pretty powerful package that, I'm sure will be rolled out sometime in probably 2019.
Yeah, I mean, no doubt. And, this is getting away from sports, but there's a reason Disney bought the 20th Century Fox film division.
Yeah.
Because, all those, the Star Wars, franchise comes with it and a bunch of other things. And so they've positioned themselves, the Disney Corporation has positioned themselves to be probably the dominant player in the entertainment business going forward. They have sports, they have TV, they have movies, and now they have, one of the major players in Hollywood in 20th Century Fox. So, they're getting bigger and bigger and bigger. It's, Disney's become a monolith.
For sure. All right, so that was round 2. Let's go to the top of the charts. We're going to round 1, our top business stories of 2017. Rich.
So I'm going to go with Teflon Rick Pitino. It looks like Rick Pitino won't be walking through that door anymore anytime soon. It may not sound like a big top story, but finally one of the big major players in not player but coaches got pinched in the NCAA, and they made an example out of him. I mean, I guess more than allegations of organizing sex parties for recruiting players and all other kind of violations. And I think that it's one of those, it's one of those things again where, we know other coaches do it, but it just happened that Rick got caught. And this isn't Rick's first sort of run in and with situations, but the far-reaching implications of the implications with sports is that I think that the NCAA may be finally trying to say, hey, I don't care who you are. If you have these many violations, then no, we're gonna take you down. I mean, you can also look as no further than also with Art Briles as well. But Pitino was a big one.
I think you brought up a major story, Rick. Rich, and I think it's a very important story because I just refuse to believe, I will not be so naive, rather, to believe that Rick Pitino is the only one doing this. Does anybody really think that Adidas is limiting, because this whole thing involved Adidas, remember? Adidas was the one that was fronting all the money, and there was a big-time exec at Adidas that was organizing all these payments and everything. I refuse to believe that Louisville is the only program that Adidas is doing this for. And I also refuse to believe that Nike isn't doing it the exact same thing, and Reebok and Under Armour aren't doing the exact same things also. I don't have any evidence of that. Nobody sue me. I think, though, that it's probably going on, and I suspect that this is one of these tip of the iceberg things.
Yeah.
And I suspect that probably more schools than just Louisville are going to come out. And, I mean, does it break my heart that a smarmy, arrogant dude like Pitino finally got kicked to the curb? No, heck no. Good riddance and goodbye. But the bigger issue again is that I think this is just the beginning, and it confirms everybody's fears that what we've believed all along, which is that the shoe companies are behind this. You guys remember the old movie with Nick Nolte and Shaquille O'Neal called Blue Chips?
Blue Chips, yeah.
Yeah.
It was from the
Yeah.
90s?
Yeah.
And what's funny is all that stuff that was going on in the movie Blue Chips was actually happening at Louisville.
Yeah.
Because it was way over the top stuff. They were in the movie. They were paying them cash and all sorts of things and buying cars, and that stuff was actually going on at Louisville. And it's not just Louisville at all. It just can't be just Louisville.
No.
So I think that might prove to be maybe the biggest story of next year when we're doing this again for the 2018 review.
I couldn't agree more. I think it's a great pull for your number one story. I do think we're at very much a tip of the iceberg situation. It's also one of those things where it's like, what is this thing in the center of my face? I've never, to your point, Steve, none of this should be surprising or shocking. I almost find it laughable that we still have pearl clutching over this. Not that it's not wrong or bad, but that we should be surprised that it's happening. And Shaquille O'Neal? Who else was in Blue Chip? Was it?
I think
I can't.
it was it Grant Hill. Grant Hill maybe in that. There was another big time basketball player, and I can't remember it. Somebody look it up.
Yeah.
I'm doing it now.
I think there was maybe even 3.
1994.
I know Shaq definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah, but there was somebody. There was another major NBA star in that movie, and it's
Penny Hardaway.
Penny Hardaway.
there. You go. Yeah, it was Penny Hardaway. That was it. Yeah.
Bob Cousy was in it.
Really?
I don't think he was playing a high school recruit though.
Al Bundy from Married with Children. Ed O'Neill was in it.
That is funny.
Yeah, but it was Penny Hardaway was who I was thinking of. But it's just kind of funny that kind of a silly movie like that, because Blue Chips didn't win any Oscars, and there's a reason for that. But it's one of those movies I always watch. If it comes on, I'll always sit down and watch it.
Yeah.
But it's pretty ironic that the situation that was seen way over the top in the movie is probably not even as bad as what was going on at Louisville.
Yeah.
So good number one story, Rich, and I think we'll be revisiting it. One thing I think I would bet on is that through all of this, somehow Jim Calipari will stay safe. I don't know how. It's some Faustian bargain, but he will always seem to escape these things.
Well, because Rich, you called Pitino Teflon Rick, but I think it's Rich Chris may be right. Calipari maybe, because Pitino's Teflon failed. He got shot in the face, and Calipari might be the one that escapes, because he's escaped all. You just know that dude is slimy, and he's escaped all blame for anything bad.
He's made of that stuff that they put on the edge of this space shuttle so it re-enters atmosphere. All right, so Steve, that brings us to your number one story.
Yeah. My number one story, I think it's clear to me that the number one sports business story of the year is the potential downfall of the NFL in the eyes of the public as the preeminent sports league in the country. And to me, it's a combination of ratings, the concussion issue, the concussion lawsuit that's going on, which is driven by a CTE story. It goes all the way down to kids in Pee-wee. You've got moms and dads not wanting their kids to play football because of the CTE issue. I think 2017 was an extremely and then you throw in the protests that Rick brought up in his number 3 story from earlier. that's clearly had an effect on the NFL's business. You throw all those things together into a big blender, and it was a pretty darn awful year for the NFL, in my opinion. And I'm not sure that they have a lot to look forward to things getting better, because I said this on the Hog Side the other day. It takes a really special kind of stupid, from a PR perspective, to really, really, really irritate both sides of an issue. And the NFL has accomplished this with this protest thing. They've really irritated the people who are anti-protest, pro-flag, pro-national anthem, those types like me. They've really irritated those folks by not putting the kibosh on the protest immediately. And at the same time, they've really irritated the people who approve of the players' rights to conduct those protests, because a lot of people don't feel like those players have been treated fairly enough and supported enough in their protests. So they've managed to irritate and isolate both sides of an issue, and it's amazing to me that the NFL has handled this incredibly badly. And then you throw in the CTE lawsuits, the CTE issue and the concussion lawsuits. I'm not sure how rosy things really are for the NFL, and if we look back a decade from now, it's possible that 2017 may be a bellwether year for the NFL, particularly with the rise of the NBA. The NBA is doing gangbusters, ratings, everything, making tons of money. We may see at some point in the future the NBA become the preeminent sport in this country. Hot take, you heard it here first.
Well, you and I have had this discussion. We've discussed it on the show. I think that no one wants to talk about it, but I think there's an undertone there's a huge undercurrent of race that plays a part in this, that many and most don't want to admit. I think that that the NFL has its share of problems, and as I shared in my number 3, I think that moving forward, I don't know how they fix it, but this has been, and as I said, I just think that because politics has been interjected into this on both sides, on many sides. This has been interjected into this, but I think that there is a major undercurrent of race with this. We can dress it up, we can say it's other stuff, but I think that that's a big piece of it.
So I'll roll this into my number 1, so we can maybe just have a little broader discussion, because this was my number 1 as well. It really is the hubris of the last 5 to 10 years of the NFL, in my mind, kind of crashing on the shore. The shield is broken. It's not just tarnished. I think that's what 2017 is going to show. I think the politics part of it is interesting, and I'm bored of it to such a degree, and I think that's actually a big part of the problem. And I think NFL, majority of these problems were already existing. What happened this fall, and whether from a Kaepernick or the Trump viewpoint, I'm not even commenting on that. But it was a brittle stack of wood that was dry and doused with oil, just waiting for someone to walk by and spark it. And that's what we've seen this year. And it really is a bouillabaisse of problems and issues coming to a boil this year. And I think the CTE issues, I just think that the players also are just too big and fast. The injuries this year are just insane. I mean, you just saw today that Cliff Averill and Cam Chancellor may never play again, and that has nothing to do with CTEs. It's hard to watch at times because it's stretcher after stretcher, not to mention the fact that the stars are falling, your Aaron Rodgers, your Deshaun Watsons. You don't even know who the heck is playing half the time, and it makes also the quality of the product just abysmal. Then if you look at politics, I'm actually not going to get political per se, but I think, Steve, you said it early in the year, the football season, talking about this. This has been such a divisive year on every front. And legitimately, at the size and scale that the NFL was, and I use past tense, it was truly the last water cooler thing in the United States. You know, the rise of fantasy sports, Super Bowl being a quasi-religious holiday. Like, people that didn't even care about football, it was in their lives. There's ladies fantasy football leagues in, offices. I mean, it was that big. And it feels like it is just tainted water in that cooler. And I think it's actually been one of those things driving kind of a little bit of a national depression, because that was gone. Like, that there wasn't somewhat that semi-sacred space on Sunday, or that conversation point, or where people from, it's not just one aisle, the next aisle, but all kinds of aisles could come together and slap backs and cheer for their team and talk about, did you see X on Monday Night Football? Like, to have that go away so quickly was really disruptive. And then you just add all the other problems, some of which the NFL and their own hubris brought on themselves, and some is just changing society. And it just is a perfect storm of bad for the NFL this year, where I think parsing a reason is almost pointless.
If you want an anecdotal point about what has happened in the NFL, I'll say this. When we do the Hogstye live tweeting for games, Alex Zeese and I usually split it up, and this week it happened to be my week, so I was doing the live tweeting for those of you who were following along with the Giants-Redskins game. And I sent out, I go to a particular sports bar to watch these games when they're not on TV here in Texas, which is often. And so I spent a lot of time in this particular sports bar over the past 3 years on Sundays. And 2 years ago, the place was packed. You couldn't get a seat. I had to fight for a television, and it was tough for me to sit down and do kind of my work of reporting on these games. Well, I sent 2 pictures out this Sunday, one in the first half, one in the second half, of the sports bar, and in both photos there was not a soul in the photo. It was just empty tables and empty chairs. I realize that I'm in Texas, and the Dallas Cowboys are out of it, and the Houston Texans have certainly been out of it. That has an effect on it. But this place was completely empty on a game day Sunday that had major games with playoff implications going on. 3 years ago, that place would have been packed. I think it's anecdotal, but I think it's symbolic of what has happened to the NFL, particularly this year.
It'd be amazing to take betting, and of which betting I will include fantasy football. I know it's not completely analogous, but I'll lump them in together. Betting on or fantasy football, if you took that out of the equation right now, like, how much of that is actually propping up the league right now? Past is just hardcore fan base. It's really fascinating. And I don't necessarily know if I see a way out, especially when you consider Tom Brady is whatever he is, 62 years old. Drew Brees is 57. It's hard to see. It's hard to see a way out. Now, they could have a great playoffs, and there could be a little bit of buzz, but I know I'm not super psyched, and I love NFL playoffs.
I think you made a good point, Chris, about the injuries. It's hard to watch sometimes. I don't know realistically. I think viewership is, statistics show viewership is down. But I just don't. Steve, you made a good point earlier about the NBA. And to me, I think one of the biggest reasons is that the political, as you said, Chris, there was a time where football was the water cooler moment and was the water cooler topic of conversation. But the NFL has become so politicized that it has eroded its fan base. The NBA, you don't hear much of anyone taking any sort of political stands. You don't hear it much in baseball. You don't hear it much in hockey. So people just want to an escape to get away from all of that. But when you turn on the television and you see it and it becomes such the negative topic of conversation, people are like, you know what? I'd rather go out to the mall with my wife or go hiking in 30-degree weather than sit here and watch football.
You're exactly right. I mean, you're exactly right. And the last thing I'll say about that is, the NBA has a much better relationship with its players than does the NFL. And the NBA is viewed by the players as being supportive of their various efforts, in the community and on social issues and whatnot. But at the same time, they make a distinct effort to make that stuff not be a part of the games. So I can sit down and watch, I don't know, the Lakers Celtics game and not get beaten over the head with it. Whereas at the same time, though, that the players feel that the league is supporting them in those efforts. And that's pretty much the opposite of what's happening in the NFL. The NFL, I am going to get beaten over the head with it by watching a game, and the players and the owners hate each other. It's an amazing thing to have watched. And 5 years ago, you never would have convinced me that this was going to happen to the NFL.
And that's really why I call it hubris a little bit, because, now it's well established that, I'm to the left of you, Steve. So part of this, in my mind, why this slapped the NFL in the face, unlike those other sports leagues, was because the NFL was highly cynical about its embracement of jingoistic patriotism. They'd always run out the flag, and they always, would do, the Jets going over, like that was a heavy push because it's sold, right? Like, I get why they would do it, but as someone like that, occasionally, listen, I love America. I don't want to debate that, but I don't need to also watch football to be like a paramilitary, what a big jock America has. So that's where the hubris comes in. They embraced that. They played it up, and I would say in a highly cynical way, not in a patriotic way. So now when we get here, it's much harder to separate these things out, and they seem like hypocrites, and it seems highly confusing.
Let me say, someone who spent his lifetime around the military and served for a very long time, I'll say about those flybys and whatnot, the military is an active participant in that because, the U.S. military views those flybys as recruiting events. They budget for that specifically. They specifically budget to be able to do things like flybys because it is a major recruiting tool. Because kids see, I just saw the B-2 flyby over at the Rose Bowl. As a matter of fact, they had a B-2 flyby over the Rose Bowl on the New Year's Day game with Georgia and Oklahoma. Kids see that and they want to join. And that's been true for decades, and that's why the military's involved. And it's not a kind of yeehaw America thing; it's a recruiting tool.
Well, but I wasn't criticizing the military for that. I was criticizing
I know
NFL
you're
for
not,
their cynicism of
I
embracing
know.
that.
Oh, I realize that, but all my point is that it was a two-way street. It's not just cynicism and the NFL trying to bamboozle people. It's the U.S. military being actively involved in that for purposes of trying to recruit.
Yeah,
that's
but
all.
if you even look at like 9/11, like the difference between what they did in baseball stadiums and what the NFL rolled out at that time, there was just, I don't know, there was a certain class, respect, honor that, and I would choose football over baseball 10 times out of 10. But there's always been a cynicism to me about how that, and so that's why I think it slaps them back in the face now.
Don't you think that the iconic image of President Bush walking out with a flak vest on under his clothes to throw out the first pitch in the World Series is probably one of the preeminent images of the latter half of the 21st century?
Sure.
Or the 20th century, rather. And that was at a baseball game. It was handled very well. Love him or hate him, because a lot of people don't like George Bush. I'm not getting into that. But the idea that the president, after 9/11, came out through the opening pitch, and we later found out he had a flak vest on and was encouraged not to do it, and he did it anyway. That was a very powerful moment that I thought healed the country in many ways at the time.
Well, you had a galvanizing moment in 9/11 that allowed us to come together. But that galvanizing moment does not exist at this point. and I'll just leave it at that.
I'm just saying. You could tell the NFL was cynical and tacky through a lot of these like hyper patriotic moments, and so it creates a culture of hypocrisy over years that when some stuff like this happens, which is galvanizing for the league, not nationally,
Right.
it's not surprising to me that the floor falls out.
Right.
Fair enough.
All right. So we did a pretty good job dissecting 2017. That was fun. I think most of these things, almost all of them, we probably hit on our show at different times. But it was fun to kind of look back collectively and give us a nice frame as we walk. Well, now we're already here as we do into our next show in 2018. Any parting shots?
All right, guys. Looking forward to it. This is a very, we've actually touched on some really interesting topics. There's a lot of food for thought, and it just has me think of where does the NFL, because the NFL has wrapped itself around so much of the social stuff and the things, does the NFL go the way of the country? And have they made their bed in this situation with the protests and things like that? So that's something that I will be really watching. I know it sounds a little serious and deep, but I mean, it's real for me.
It is serious and deep.
Yeah.
The NFL shouldn't want it to be serious and deep
Right.
about them. They should want to be an entertainment platform,
Right.
but they've done it to themselves.
Yeah, and that's I think that's Steve, where I think you and I have and I think all three of us have a broad area of agreement that like something has been, hopefully not, but possibly irrevocably tainted.
Yeah, I mean, I think, but you know what? I think as the events of this season, people have a short memory, I think, or some could. Next season's a new season. When we're 11-5 and playing in the playoffs with Colt McCoy, this will be a mere memory. So, let's end on that.
Yeah, let's end on that fairy tale. Let's go out on a positive.
A hopeful note. A hopeful note.
All right, we'll see you back in a couple weeks with forward-looking stories as we trudge into 2018. See you next time.
All right, guys. See ya.